The number 19 is the only number in the Quran which was highlighted for its own sake, and this was in a powerful statement regarding what this number can lead to. To better understand this, we must look at Surah Al-Muddathir, chapter 74. While jumping into the findings immediately would be nice, it is however important to at least have a general look at certain parts of the chapter. A deep explication is of course very important, but in extreme summary, we can say that this surah starts with a call to get up and give warning, glorify Allah, cleanse and purify oneself, and to do so frequently and with patience. And the warning is about a very difficult day when this world will end, and that it will be especially difficult for non-believers. The example is given of a non-believer with specific traits. These traits are that despite all the blessings, he arrogantly refused Allah's signs. This individual actually thought carefully about the matter and measured it or deliberated, yet still despite this refused. This came in the word qaddar, which also means to measure and enumerate or count. 3 times this word was repeated, translated usually as deliberated, which also means to measure or account. For example, if someone qaddar the area of a property, then he measured it carefully. While if one qaddar an issue, then he is said to have deliberated and thought about it, i.e. measured the problem. At any rate, this person arrogantly refused and turned away, and in such refusal and arrogance claimed that the Quran was magic or man-made. Such a person, these verses tell us, will be tormented in hell. And it is here where it states that upon it or over it, i.e. hell, are 19. This of course is in reference to the number of angels guarding or overseeing hell. Is it 19 individual angels or types? That's a different issue. What matters here is that this number 19 was now mentioned, and the very next verse suddenly breaks this thread of very short verses. Visually this looks like this, with 30 short verses and then suddenly a very long and explicit verse that specifically says the number of the angels, i.e. their number, which is a fitna, and not the angels themselves, i.e. the number 19 just mentioned, is and will do the following. It will be a fitna or trial for the non-believers, those who have been given the scriptures, i.e. the Christians and Jews, will know for sure and without doubt, i.e. with certainty. The believers will increase in faith. Both the people of the book and the Muslims will no longer have doubt, but those who are sick in their hearts and those who wish to hide the truth or disbelievers will say, what does Allah want or intend with such an example? Basically, rejectors will say it doesn't mean anything. And this will be one way through which Allah will lead astray or guide whomever He wills. It also says that Allah knows His soldiers, meaning that this sign will be like a soldier supporting the faith, and that this is a remembrance to all of humanity. So, for this specific sign, there is no need to be an expert in Arabic. Numbers are universal. Of course, you can see that this is quite a lot, and Sheikh Bassam Jarrar explains that only now we can start to realize why and how the specific soldier is the mathematics of the Quran pioneered by the discoveries launched after measuring and thinking about what this number 19 itself and not the angels can lead to, because otherwise it will not fully make sense. Why would an atheist care or be tested by the information that hell has 19 angels, both of which he or she deny the existence of? So it has to be the number itself, not hell and its guardians. How can all of humanity be tested by this and be assured with certainty, except those with dishonest hearts, if it is just about the angels of hell being 19? Think about this deeply. This verse 31 is telling us something. It is about the number 19 itself. A lot more can be said about this in support, but we must move on. The very next verse after this, Allah swears by His creation, all related to time, which of course is also a measure, and then states that this is one of the major or great signs to warn people. And the chapter then continues. There's a lot to unpack here, so grab a notepad and pen and let's get started. Of course, in this video, we will focus on the mathematical and not the linguistic side, which of course takes priority over understanding the Quran. But our topic here is the mathematics. Like all codes, there must be a key. And in the Quran, I have noted in previous videos how chapter 1 is the mother of the Quran. And of course, it is the most important surah. For example, in prayers, you must recite it at the start of every rak'ah while praying. Thinking about how this number 19 can do all of this and be a major sign, we look closely at the Quran. Sheikh Bassam Jarrar highlights that we find that the very first verse in the entire Quran, chapter 1, verse 1, has a total of exactly 19 letters. The first verse, number 19, in the entire Quran has exactly 19 words. The first chapter that was revealed in the Quran was Surah Al-Alaq, and it is exactly 19 verses. Furthermore, the order of Surah Al-Alaq from the end of the Quran is 19, and the total letters of this chapter are exactly 285, which is a multiple of 19. Subhanallah. The last surah that was revealed is Surah Al-Nasr. Its first verse is 19 letters. This last revealed surah, its total words are 19. The total chapters of the Quran are 114, which again is a multiple of 19. Subhanallah. Something unique is going on here, and thus we continue to contemplate this. Keeping in mind that the Quran is 114 surahs, i.e. chapters, those from Quranway.com highlight that the first letter in the Quran is the letter Ba, B, and it repeated in the first 114 words exactly 19 times. But how can we know? It's not by chance. So we check and we see that the last letter in the Quran is the letter Sin, S, and it repeated in the last 114 words exactly 19 times. Subhanallah, the mathematical balance and harmony is endless. The first verse in the Quran, the first chapters revealed, the first verse number 19, and even the first and last single letter in the Quran are all again highlighting the number 19. We explained that the number 19 was mentioned and explained in Surah Al-Muddathir, chapter 74. In this chapter, which mentioned the number 19, when we look at verse 19, we find that it contains 3 words. Of course, if we multiply the verse number 19 by the number of words, we get 57. But what is 57? Let's keep this in mind for now and move on. Is there even more regarding this number of words being 3? and its relation to the verse number, which is 19. Adding one of my own findings to these made by others, let me note that verse 19 in this chapter has 3 words, and the verse that mentioned the number 19, i.e. verse 30, also has 3 words. What mathematical harmony is going on here? Why is the mention of 19 in a 3-word verse, and its chapter's 19th verse also 3 words? Amazingly, I found that in the entire Quran, the number of chapters that have exactly 19 verses is 3. Subhanallah, the perfect harmony continues. If this is all about multiples of 19, and we saw earlier the pattern of firsts, just like we had seen the relationship of 19 with the first letter in the Quran, the first verse in the Quran, the first revelation, and so on, I wanted to check the relationship of 19 and its multiples in the first chapter in the Quran with 19 verses. The first chapter in the Quran with 19 verses is Surah Al-Infitar, chapter 82. 82 times 19 equals 1558, 1558. So what is 1558? I was shocked to find that 1558 is the sum total of all verses number 19 in the entire Quran. Subhanallah, there are exactly 82 verses number 19 in the Quran, and chapter 82 is 19 verses, and of course 19 times 82 gives the total sum of all their verse numbers. This is stunning. But it doesn't end here, because I then found that the 82nd verse from the start of the Quran is 19 words. Subhanallah. But again, it doesn't end here. This verse had 19 words, but what about letters? Well, I checked, and it has exactly 76 letters, which is also a multiple of 19. I must resist following every thread, so let's get back on track. If there are exactly 82 chapters in the Quran that have a verse number 19, or in other words, 82 verses 19 in the Quran, which highlighted 19 in chapter 82, this means that the chapters in the entire Quran that do not have a verse 19 are 32. Since this is revolving around chapter numbers and verses, I went to chapter 32 and found that verse 19 in chapter 32 has exactly 57 letters. Subhanallah. Again, we see 57 highlighted, which takes us back to 3 times 19. 3 is the number of words in the relevant verses in the chapter where number 19 is highlighted and addressed. And 3 is the number of chapters in the Quran that are 19 verses, and all the rest that we had already mentioned. All of this is still just the lead we took from the first chapter in the Quran with 19 verses. But what about the last chapter in the Quran that has 19 verses? It is Surah Al-Alaq, which earlier we mentioned is the first chapter revealed in the Quran, and its total letters are exactly 285, which again is a multiple of 19. Of course, for more about this chapter, see its mention in previous videos. But let's get back to where we started, to the chapter where 19 was mentioned and discussed. I noticed that the very important word, qaddar, decreed, measured, account, and so on, was not only mentioned in verse 19, but was also mentioned nowhere else in this chapter except 3 consecutive times. as the last word in verses 18, 19, and 20. I could go into how the total words for these verses is 10, and the total letters in the three qaddar words is also 10, because first form of the word was 4 letters, not 3, and that from verse 19 up until the mention of 19 are 10 verses. In fact, the total letters in these verses is 57. So again, we see 57 highlighted. And so on. But that is not the thread I want to follow here. The appearance of this word 3 times, and it being a 3-letter word, and its appearance in verse 19 made me look closer. So I did, and found that the numerical letter value of the word qaddar itself was 304, which again is a multiple of 19, in the form of 19 times 16. Of course, if we follow the number 16, we end up with what is beyond breathtaking. Just see the mind-blowing episode 8 in the series about the bees. Furthermore, this relationship to qaddar is closely related to the word al-qadar, which also appeared 3 times in its own chapter, Surat al-Qadar. And to see what that led to, see episode 4. Then we see that the qaddar, i.e. to measure or to account verses, total letters are exactly 31. But what is 31? As you probably guessed it, 31 is the verse number of the verse where the number 19 was explained. Then we find that the qaddar verses, verse number sum total, again gives us 57. So again 57 has been highlighted by the code of 19 in this chapter. But again we ask, why 57? So verse 19 in the chapter which mentions the number 19 and explains its importance is 3 words. And as we said, 3 times 19 equals 57. And the sum total of the qaddar verses numbers is again 57. And the mention of 19 was in a 3-word verse, which again takes us to 57, as 19 times 3. So why is 57 being repeatedly highlighted? Why not another multiple of 19? Keep in mind that the theme of first verse in the Quran is 19 letters, first chapter revealed is 19 verses, and so on. Now let's look at this finding by Sheikh Bassam Jarrar. Subhanallah, the chapter that states 19 and highlights how important it is, its first 19 verses contain exactly 57 words, which is a multiple of 19. And this 19th verse has 3 words. So 3 times 19 is the verse's own math, telling us how many words exactly there are from the start of the chapter up to this verse. That's astonishing. But this word count code doesn't stop here. Shockingly, the verse which specifically tells us that this number 19 will open up all this Quran code and be a great sign has exactly 57 words. This is stunning mathematical harmony. Verse 19 has 3 words, and the verse in which 19 was mentioned is also 3 words, and 19 times 3 equals 57, which is exactly how many words there are in the first 19 verses, and the verse that follows the mention of 19 and explains why it's an important number is also exactly 57 words. Subhanallah, the perfect mathematical harmony is beautiful. But what's there about this verse number being 31 for the verse which explains the number 19 and is 57 words? Do you remember in episode 6 what we found about chapter 1 and the number 31? Chapter 1 is the mother of the Quran, and verse 1 in chapter 1 is 19 letters. We also saw in other episodes how closely connected the code of chapter 1 is to the rest of the Quran. Remember that verse 19 in the chapter that highlights the number 19 has exactly 3 words. And in that same chapter, the number 19 is mentioned in a verse with 3 words. Now, think about this part of that episode 6. The first verse alone is comprised of 19 letters, and 19 is the greatest Quran mathematical key. The surprising thing is that the researchers have found the following. The shortest verse has only 2 words, and it is verse number 3. The middle verse has 3 words, and before it are 3 verses, and after it are also 3 verses. This balance makes us use the 3 words of the middle verse, each at a time, and analyze them, with their counterparts from the other verses. To that end, we end up with 3 groups of verses. When we take the first word from each verse in the whole chapter, we end up with a total of 31 letters. This alone may not mean anything, but the surprise is that when we do the same with the second words, we again get a total of 31. So since 3 has been clearly highlighted, we check to see if this will apply to a total of 3 groups. And indeed, when we repeat this a third time with every third word in the verses, we again end up with 31. Even though the third verse does not even have a third word. This is amazing. Subhanallah. Chapter 1 starts with verse 1, which is 19 letters. And verse 19 in each chapter that highlights the importance of 19 has 3 words. And we will look at the totals as we did for chapter 1 for the first, second, and third words, each in their verses. They each have a total of 31 letters. And it is verse 31 in the chapter that highlights the importance of 19 and has 57 words, which is 3 times 19. Okay, we covered the word counts, but what about letters? Sheikh Bassam Jarrar found that from the start of this chapter, which mentions the number 19, all the way up to the statement 19 in verse 30, there are exactly 361 letters, i.e., the last letter before saying 19, تسعة عشر, is letter 361. But what is 361? Shockingly, 361 is exactly 19 multiplied by 19. Imagine that. The greatest key in the Quran, its number is 19, and its mention within the chapter it comes after exactly 19 times 19 letters. Subhanallah. This is already more than enough to demonstrate this perfect code. But what comes next is perhaps even more stunning. When we take the numerical letter value of the verse 19, we get exactly 1024. But what is 1024? Shockingly, 1024 is exactly the total number of letters in this chapter. I feel compelled to rephrase this. The chapter in which the number 19 is mentioned and highlighted as a great sign, the numerical value of the letters of its verse 19 is 1024, which is exactly equal to the number of letters in the entire chapter. This is truly breathtaking and simply beyond human capacity. This verse 19 alone gives, among all the other things we mentioned, the code for exactly how many words are there in the first 19 verses and the code for exactly how many letters are in the entire chapter. Subhanallah. But as always, we are not done yet. And we probably never ever will be. Looking at this amazing find by the Shaykh, I realized that the number 1024 was not a normal number, but rather part of a sequence, which is an infinite series of successive powers of 2. So I wanted to see if I could again add some of my own findings. This sequence is probably familiar to you. It's 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 2 equals 4, 4 plus 4 equals 8, 8 plus 8 equals 16, and so on. The total times this is done to get 1024 is 10, which, as we already noted, is exactly the number of verses between verse 19 and the mention of number 19 in this chapter. We also said that the total words in the 3 qaddar verses are 10, and that the total letters in the 3 appearances of the word qaddar are again 10. But it does not end there. 10 is also exactly the number of letters in verse 19. Yet, 10 is a whole subject on its own and seems to be a fundamental cycle which needs more research. And keep in mind that the number 19 is 1 and 9. Their sum again gives 10. Subhanallah, the code is endless. Before moving on, let's get back to the findings of Sheikh Bassam Jarrar, who also noted one more thing I'd like to mention, which is that from the start of this chapter, which mentions 19, up until the verse that mentions the number 19, i.e. verse 30, the total number of words is exactly 95. Subhanallah, this again is a multiple of 19. But of course we are not done. Let's see some of the other amazing related findings which were presented by the researchers from QuranWay.com. They explain that in Surah Al-Isra, verse 88 contains exactly 19 words. By the way, to see the amazing code about 88, see episode 7 in this series. Anyway, from the Hijai Arabic alphabet, this verse is made up of exactly 19 letters. This is rather unique, especially since 19 is the main key, so we look even closer. The 19th letter in the Hijai alphabetic order is the letter Ghain, and amazingly, this 19th letter of the alphabet appeared from the start of the chapter up until this verse exactly 19 times. Furthermore, the shortest verse in this chapter is exactly 19 letters. That this verse was made up using 19 of the Hijai letters means that there are 9 letters that do not appear in this verse. And the sum of the number of their alphabetic order is 114, which is the number of chapters in the Quran, and again a multiple of 19. Because Quran Way use grammar rules, they have highlighted that from a grammatical rules approach, this verse also demonstrates this stunning harmony. First of all, I should note why this verse is so important. This is called the challenge verse. In this verse, Allah states that if all of humanity and jinnkind were to unite and help each other to come up with something like this Quran, مثل هذا القرآن, they can't. This phrase, like this Quran, is centered in this verse, and we notice the following. To the right are exactly 32 letters, perfectly balanced with 32 letters to its left. Likewise are 20 letters without dots on each side, and 12 letters with dots on each side. Keep in mind that different letters have different numbers of dots. Yet again, each side has exactly 17 letter dots. I will also add that each side has a total of 8 complete words. Subhanallah. Yet this ring composition or balance we have seen so far repeat in several key places within the Quran. It also appears in several variations. One variation was noted by one YouTuber in a relevant verse to our theme of 19. In fact, the main key of the 19 code. Remember that the key of 19 is in the first verse of the Quran, which is 19 letters. Examining this verse, we see that some letters repeat while other letters only appear once. The letters that don't repeat are ba, sin, ha, noon, and ya, for a total of exactly 5 letters. The letters that do repeat are again exactly 5 letters: mim, alif, lam, ra, and ha. Thus a total of 5 letters on each side. Of course, 5 is a key number in Islam, with 5 daily prayers, the 5 pillars of Islam, and so on. Having gotten this far, and there is so much more that I simply cannot cover in one video, I noticed the following. After the mention of the number 19 in verse 30, the following verse, 31, explains how this number 19 will lead to the things we had already mentioned. And so the discussion is still about this number. Now remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by His creation. In the very next verse, Allah swears by the moon. Can you see it? 19 is the number of years in the metonic cycle of the moon. Subhanallah. Allah mentions the moon immediately after mentioning and then highlighting how important and great of a sign this number 19 is, and the moon's metonic cycle is exactly 19 years. And of course, each year is 12 months, 7 days a week, and the lunar month is 29 days, because it takes 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 seconds for the moon to complete one lunar month. So it's not 30 days. Amazingly, the 19th verse in the Quran is verse 12, with 7 words and 29 letters. This, of course, leads us to the amazing findings we covered in episode 5 about the calendar. As a bonus, let me add that, as often mentioned, the Quran has what we call al-huruf al-muqatta'a. These are the unique letters that open some of the chapters, and they are pronounced separately. Among these letters is the letter Qaf. Chapter Qaf, literally the name of the chapter, is the name of the letter Qaf itself. Amazingly, this letter Qaf appeared in chapter Qaf exactly 57 times, which is 19 times 3. Could this be just a coincidence? Demonstrating that it is not. We see that the letter Qaf does not appear in any other chapter in its capacity as one of the al-huruf al-muqatta'a except in chapter 42, which starts with 5 of these unique letters. When we check that chapter, we are amazed to see that, again, it appears throughout that chapter exactly 57 times. How can it be that the only 2 appearances of the letter Qaf as one of the huruf al-muqatta'a in both chapters it appeared exactly 57 times? Now let's add that together. 57 plus 57 is 114, which again is as a multiple of 19. And of course, the Quran is 114 chapters. But what about the 6? 6 is the number of letters in the word Al-Quran, the Quran. So amazingly, another way of looking at this is that the word Quran starts with the letter Qaf. The word Al-Quran, the Quran, is 6 letters. The letter Qaf in its capacity as one of the huruf al-muqatta'a only appeared in 2 chapters. Within each one of these 2 chapters, it appeared 57 times, which together are 114, which is the total chapters in the Quran. Subhanallah, the mathematical harmony is truly endless. I will not even go into how the days of creation are 6, or how the geometric manifestation of the number 19 is a 1 surrounded by 6 surrounded by 12, and what that could lead to, because that is a very large topic. But let's get to this final bonus point. I checked the appearances of every single letter in all chapters of the Quran and found that out of all the letters, only 5 letters never appeared in any chapter 19 times. Basically, all other letters appeared in at least one chapter a total of 19 times. These letters have a total numerical value of 2,356. Subhanallah, this too is a multiple of 19. So the only letters that never appeared in any chapter 19 times have a total numerical value that is a multiple of 19. Subhanallah, how can verse 19, any chapter that mentions and highlights 19, its words 3 multiplied by its verse number, equal exactly the number of words in the first 19 verses? How can that also be exactly the number of words in the verse about the number 19? How can this also be exactly the case in the verse that mentions the number 19 and also is 3 words? Thus again giving the total number of words in the first 19 verses and the total number of words in the verse about number 19. How can there be exactly 19 multiplied by 19 letters before the number 19? How can the numerical value of verse 19 be exactly the number of letters in the entire chapter? How can this mathematical harmony be so perfect and lead to the endless breathtaking findings we already highlighted in other videos? This is just the beginning, and soon this number 19 will make it so that all people, atheists, Christians, Jews, and others, will know without a doubt that this Quran is the truth, so that those who believe may increase in faith, and those who reject it will be so blind as to say it means nothing, or what does Allah want with such a sign? It is a universal sign, and all those who can see this series will know that it is beyond human capacity.